The world of RC is somewhat unique as opposed to other activities in sports in that you can't just have a noob walk in off the street and just start doing it to some level. It requires a pretty sizable time and financial commitment that, to be honest, a lot of people just don't have the resources for. But fear not, just because you don't have a spare $1,000 laying around does not mean that you still can't have a great time in this hobby and make your experience a little less painful. And that brings me to the topic of today's video of what I believe are the two best ways to get into FPV right now. Whether you're into freestyle, racing, long range, tiny whoops, or whatever else, I believe these two ways are the best and most cost-effective ways to enter the FPV world. Through talking to many different people over the years that are considering getting into some form of RC hobby, whether it be airplanes, drones, helicopters, cars, or whatever else, there seems to be like two different groups that these people tend to fall into. First, you've got the people that are kind of on the fence. I like to call them toe dippers. Maybe they just haven't had that experience yet that really strikes a nerve with them and gets them excited about FPV. And then on the other side, you've got the people that already are 100% sold on it. They just don't know where to start. But naturally, the toe dipper group, the one that's kind of on the fence and just hasn't had that experience yet, are of course the much larger group. And it makes sense, right? FPV is kind of a niche hobby. It's kind of hard to get people excited about it. And I think one of the biggest roadblocks to the success of FPV as a whole, and just RC in general, is that we don't address this group nearly well enough. Alright, so let's say you're part of that group. Let's say you're on the fence. You think FPV is really cool, and you can see yourself kind of liking it, but you're not really sure if you want to make that huge financial commitment. Because like I stated before in the intro, it can cost like well over $1,000 to get some cool footage. And maybe you just don't want to make that commitment. Maybe you just don't have the money. Maybe the money is being used for something else. If you are in that situation, if you are one of those people, the best thing I could recommend you do if you want to get into FPV and at least dabble is to get a ready-to-fly tiny whoop. And if you're not familiar, a tiny whoop is a small, low-powered, relatively inexpensive drone that is very tough, can be flown indoors, and is very beginner-friendly. And these tiny whoops are very, very light, so they don't hit with much force. And what that means is they're really, really resilient in a crash. And as a beginner, as someone who's going to be smashing into walls left and right in your home, that's really important. With just $200, you can get one of these drones complete with a controller, a charger, a video system, and batteries, shipped to your door, and you can fly it that day. But don't let their small size fool you. These things are a shit ton of fun, and there's even a whole section of the FPV community that just flies tiny whoops. What better way to experience flight for the first time from a drone's perspective than to fly over your cabinets or fly under your bed? With these little drones, there's a very, very good chance that you'll be hooked as soon as you take off for the first time. And also worth noting is that tiny whoops are actually quite a bit more difficult to fly than the larger, more powerful drones that you see a lot of people that are, really into the hobby fly. And that's mainly because they're so lightweight and they just don't have the power of these larger drones and they get blown around really easily. And that's actually really, really good for a beginner because as you are crashing all the time, you're actually building valuable muscle memory that translates really, really well to larger and more powerful drones. The basic stick movements and reactions are really what you're after here, and there's nothing better to build that than a tiny whoop. If you can control a super, super lightweight thing going really fast in your home, you can control anything. And what's even better about these is that you can fly them all year round. As somebody that comes from the Midwest and a super shithole cold environment, I can tell you that's really valuable. Traditionally, what we'd have to do is to wait till the summer to do any of these RC activities. But with a tiny whoop, you can practice inside all winter long with no regard for weather. Don't let the weather slow you down. Just find a way around it. These are a great way around it. But in summary, buying a ready-to-fly tiny whoop drone is an excellent way to enter the FPV world if you're kind of on the fence, you're not quite sure if you're gonna like it. It's a relatively low-cost option that comes with all you need. It's very low effort to get working and get in the air, and it allows you to just do nothing but fly. Do nothing but just see if you like it. And who knows, after flying this for a while, you might find that tiny whoops actually are your thing, and then you've already got a head start. But what if you're not on the fence? What if you're not dabbling? What if you already know that you're gonna love FPV, but you just don't know where to start? Well, that's kind of the situation that I was in, and this is what I would do if I could do it all over again. The most important piece of gear, besides of course the drone, is the transmitter. Buy a good one now and it'll grow with you, and you might not ever have to buy one again. Buying a good transmitter right away as your first piece of gear will allow you to immediately jump in the simulators and build your skills, build your confidence before you invest a lot more money in a super expensive drone setup. And when you are finally ready for that next step and that real drone, guess what? You've already got a good controller that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to get used to anything new. You can just use what you've been using the whole time. And that cuts out that entire part of the learning curve. Now, the route I went, which I do not recommend, is to buy cheaper things now and more expensive things later. I started with a Spectrum DX6 that I used for basically bind and fly airplanes. Then I moved to a Tyrannus, then I moved to the FreeSky R9 system, and then finally I moved to Express ELRS. What I should have done is just bought a good radio system right from the start. It would have saved me hundreds of dollars. So now let's assume that you have a radio, you've been grinding in the simulator, you have the skills, you have the confidence, you're ready. But what's next? Well, this is where having a good radio really comes in handy. A good, high-quality radio will either natively support or be able to be upgraded with a module that supports pretty much any radio protocol out there. And I really do mean pretty much every single radio protocol out there. Whether it's a shitty, cheap Chinese toy from Amazon or a bind and fly airplane from Horizon Hobby, chances are some of these radios that have the multi-protocol modules can support that, and you can control those with the radio. I have a whole video on the 3 most important pieces of gear in FPV, and a good radio is #1 on that list. And if you want to see the other 2 items on that list, check out my video in the description down below. Well, there you have it, the 2 best ways to get into the FPV drone world in 2023/2024. Whether you're kind of on the fence or you're already 100% sold, I believe one of these methods will work for you. And just to recap, if you are on the fence, consider buying a ready-to-fly Tiny Whoop drone. It's inexpensive, it's low effort, and it just works. You'll know right away if FPV is for you, and you won't be out thousands of dollars if you don't like it. And for those of you that know that you will love it right away, get a good radio. A good radio will grow with you, and it won't hold you back as you get further and further into the hobby. Well, I hope this helps somebody out there currently in one of these 2 situations. I know when I was first starting out, it would have been really helpful to hear stuff like this from just your average drone pilot. I think sometimes in this hobby, those of us that are in it can kind of assume that people know what we're talking about, or people don't need any further explanation. And that's what I'm trying to address with these videos directed more towards beginners. I think it's important to have a voice that can speak with them and identify with them a little bit more. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something here today, I'd really appreciate it if you drop me a like down below and hit that subscribe button. And if you've got any other ideas of how to get into the hobby that are somewhat cost effective and somewhat painless, go ahead and drop them down below in the comments. And until next time, thank you guys again for watching and supporting my channel. I truly, truly appreciate it. Thank you. Keep ripping, keep wrecking, and keep learning. Peace.